The rain hit the glass doors of Whitmore Family Clinic in sharp, angry bursts, and Mara Doyle did not look up from the appointment screen fast enough to catch the man who slipped in from the storm like he did not want to be seen. His shoes were the first thing she noticed. Cracked leather, soaked through, the kind of shoes that had walked more miles than they were built for. Then the shirt. White once, gray now. A small tear at the collar that someone had tried to stitch and given up on halfway through. He stood just inside the door and did not move toward the front desk right away. He looked at the room the way a man looks at a room he is deciding whether he trusts. Mara had been at Whitmore for 4 months, long enough to know the rhythm of the place, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the particular impatience of Tuesday mornings when the waiting room filled up with people who had somewhere else to be. She had not been there long enough to know that the clinic itself, the building, the equipment, the salaries that landed in her account every other Friday, belonged to a man named Salvatore Conti, and that Salvatore Conti did not sign his name to anything without first watching how the people under him treated a stranger who could offer them nothing. The man in the tattered shirt approached the desk slowly, like his knees ached, like the walk from the door to the counter cost him something. Up close, his face was lined in a way that made him look older than he probably was, though there was nothing frail in his eyes. His eyes were dark and steady and did not blink the way nervous men's eyes blink. He set a folded scrap of paper on the counter, an appointment card, water-stained, the ink smeared but legible. 10:30, Dr. Elmswood. "I have an appointment," he said. His voice was low, roughened at the edges, the voice of a man who did not speak more than he had to. Mara smiled at him the way she smiled at everyone, because that was simply how she was built. But there was something in this smile that reached her eyes more than the polite ones did. "Of course. Let me just pull that up for you." She typed the name into the system. It came back under a placeholder, a common trick the clinic used for referrals who came through unusual channels. She did not think twice about it. "You're a little early. That's perfectly fine. Can I get your name for the file?" "Sal," he said. Nothing else. "All right, Sal. The doctor is running about 10 minutes behind, if that's okay." She glanced past him at the rain streaking the glass, at the way his shoulders were still damp from whatever distance he had walked to get here. Behind her, she heard the click of heels on tile, the sharp rhythm that belonged to her supervisor, Priya Malhotra, who managed the front of house with the kind of precision that left no room for softness. Mara did not turn around. She reached beneath the counter instead, to the small coffee station the staff kept for themselves. The one Priya had told her twice already was not for patients. "Would you like a coffee while you wait? It's cold out there." Mara was already pouring before he answered. The man looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she almost took it back, almost apologized, thought perhaps she had overstepped in some way she did not understand. But then he nodded, once, and something in his face shifted, some small crack in the composure he wore like armor. "That's kind of you," he said. "People don't usually offer." "Well, people should," Mara said, sliding the cup across the counter. "Cream or sugar? We only have the powdered kind, I'm sorry to say." "Black is fine." He wrapped both hands around the cup like it was the first warm thing he had touched all day, and Mara had already turned to greet the next patient in line, a woman with a toddler perched on her hip, when Priya's hand landed on her shoulder from behind, fingers pressing in with more force than a casual touch required. "A word," Priya said, and it was not a question. They stepped into the small office behind the reception desk, and Priya closed the door with a click that felt louder than it should have. "That coffee is for staff," she said. "You know that. I've told you that." "He looked like he needed it," Mara said. "It's a cup of coffee, Priya." It's not about the coffee. Priya's voice dropped, the particular hush of someone who thought they were being reasonable. You don't know who walks through that door. We had a man in here last month who tried to walk out with the pulse oximeters in his coat. You can't just hand out kindness to every stranger who looks pitiful. This is a business, not a shelter. Mara felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice even. He had an appointment. He's a patient. I don't think giving someone a warm drink while they wait is against clinic policy. It's against my policy, Priya said, and that was the end of it, or she meant it to be. She turned on her heel and walked back out to the floor, already reaching for the next chart, already moving on to the next thing that needed her attention. And Mara stood there for a moment with her hands pressed flat against the counter in the little back office, breathing out slowly, telling herself it did not matter, that she had done nothing wrong, that this was simply what it felt like to work for someone who measured kindness against liability. When she came back out, the man called Sal was still in the waiting area, the coffee cup nearly empty in his hands, watching the room the way he had watched it when he first came in. He caught her eye across the space and gave her the smallest nod, an acknowledgement that seemed to carry more weight than the gesture should have. She did not know why her chest tightened when he did it. She told herself it was nothing. What she did not know yet was that the man drinking her coffee owned the building she stood in, the machines behind the walls, the very desk she leaned against. What she did not know yet was that he had walked in wearing another man's shoes and another man's shirt for the specific purpose of finding out what his staff did when they believed no one of consequence was watching. Salvatore Conti did this twice a year, sometimes 3 times if a location gave him reason to worry. He owned 4 clinics across the city, all of them clean, all of them useful, all of them a legitimate business built on the bones of a family that had never dealt only in legitimate things. The clinics mattered to him in a way his other holdings did not. His mother had died in a waiting room much like this one, decades ago, in a clinic that had turned her away for lack of proof of payment. And by the time someone finally saw her, the infection in her had already won. Salvatore had been young then, and powerless, and he had promised himself in the sterile hallway outside her room that he would never again own or be near a place that made a person feel like their suffering was conditional on paperwork. So he tested them. He dressed down, took a false name, sat in his own waiting rooms, and watched how the desk staff treated the people who looked like they could not afford to be treated well. Most staff passed a mediocre test. Politeness, efficiency, nothing more. Some failed badly enough that he closed accounts and opened new ones within the week. He had never, in 6 years of doing this, watched someone pour him a cup of coffee from behind a counter where they had clearly been told not to. He finished the coffee slowly, watching Mara move through the waiting room, watching the particular care she took with an elderly man struggling to fill out his intake form, the way she crouched down to his eye level instead of leaning over him, the patience in her voice when she repeated a question he had not heard the first time. She was quick with the harried mother of 2 who was already 20 minutes late for a follow-up appointment across town. Quick, but not cold. Efficient without making the woman feel like a burden. Salvatore watched all of it with the stillness of a man cataloging evidence. When his name, the false one, was finally called, he rose from the plastic chair and followed a nurse back through the double doors, and Mara caught his eye one more time before he disappeared, gave him a small smile that had nothing calculated in it, nothing that expected anything back. That was the moment he decided he needed to know more about her. He did not go through with the appointment charade for long. 20 minutes later, in an examination room with a doctor who had known exactly who he was the moment he walked in, but had been ordered months ago never to acknowledge it, Salvatore changed out of the tattered shirt and back into the suit that had been quietly delivered through a side entrance. The doctor, A woman named Ruth Elmswood, who had worked for the Conti family for 11 years, watched him button his cuffs with the practiced silence of someone who understood the terms of her employment. "The receptionist," Salvatore said, not looking up from his cuffs. "Mara, how long has she worked here?" 4 months, Ruth said. "Good instincts with patience. Priya's been writing her about the small stuff, nothing that would concern you." "It concerns me," Salvatore said, and left it there. He did not walk back out through the waiting room. He left through the side entrance the same way he had come in, and by the time his car pulled away from the curb, black and unremarkable, windows tinted enough to keep his face a shadow, he had already made a decision that would have surprised anyone who thought they understood him. He was going to come back, not as Sal in the tattered shirt, as himself. That was the moment everything changed, though Mara would not know it for 3 more days. The 3 days passed the way ordinary days did. Mara worked her shifts, endured Priya's particular brand of oversight, ate lunch alone in the break room reading a paperback she kept in her bag for exactly that purpose. She thought about the man in the torn shirt more than she expected to, the way his eyes had not matched the rest of him, sharp and assessing in a face that otherwise told a story of hardship. She told herself it did not matter. Strangers passed through the clinic every day. She would likely never see him again. She was wrong. On the 4th day, a black car pulled up outside Whitmore Family Clinic at 9 in the morning, before the doors had technically opened, and the man who stepped out of it wore a charcoal suit cut close to his frame, a white shirt so crisp it looked machine-pressed moments ago, and a watch on his wrist that caught the early light in a way that made it clear it was not a watch bought at any store Mara had ever walked into. Priya saw him first through the glass, and her whole posture changed, a visible straightening, the kind of reflexive deference that comes from recognizing power before understanding its source. "That's him," Priya said under her breath, more to herself than to Mara. "That's Mr. Conti." Mara looked up from the appointment screen and felt something cold slide down the back of her neck when she recognized the eyes first. The eyes had not changed. Everything else about him had: the clothes, the posture, the sheer physical presence that filled the doorway when he stepped through it. But the eyes were the same steady, assessing eyes that had watched her pour him coffee 3 days ago. He walked directly to the front desk, and Priya practically fell over herself trying to greet him first, but his gaze had already moved past her and settled on Mara. "Hello again," he said. Mara's mouth went dry. She understood all at once, with a clarity that made her stomach drop, exactly who had been standing in front of her 3 days ago, in a torn white shirt, drinking black coffee from a paper cup, watching her, the way a man watches something he is trying to memorize. "You," she managed. That was you." "Sal," he confirmed. "Salvatore Conti. I own this clinic. I own 3 others like it." He set both hands on the counter, the same counter where his fingers had wrapped around a coffee cup days before, and something in the gesture made Priya visibly flinch backward, putting distance between herself and the desk, as if proximity to him was suddenly a liability. "I come in disguised sometimes, to see how my staff treats people who look like they have nothing to offer." The silence in the waiting room had gone total. Even the patients who had trickled in for the early appointments had stopped their quiet conversations to watch. "I gave you coffee," Mara said, because it was the only thing her mind could produce. "You did." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close to one. "Against explicit instruction, I understand." His eyes flicked, briefly, deliberately to Priya, and Priya's face drained of color in a way that told Mara everything she needed to know about what was coming next. "I heard the conversation. The walls in that back office are thinner than you think, Ms. Malhotra." "Mr. Conti, I was simply maintaining protocol regarding the staff coffee station. It's a matter of resource allocation, nothing more." I would never presume to suggest that kindness toward a patient was somehow inappropriate, Priya said, the words tumbling out fast enough to trip over themselves. You told her kindness was against your policy? Salvatore said, and his voice did not rise, did not sharpen, and somehow that made it worse than if it had. I don't run clinics so that the people in them can decide who deserves warmth and who doesn't. My mother died in a waiting room because someone made that exact calculation about her. I don't forget things like that. The words landed in the room like something physical. Mara felt herself go very still, watching a version of this man reveal itself that she had not expected, something raw beneath the composed authority, a wound that clearly had never fully closed. Priya opened her mouth to respond and closed it again, apparently understanding, finally, that there was no version of this conversation she could win. You're relieved of your position here, effective today, Salvatore said. HR will process the paperwork. I'd ask that you leave the floor within the hour. He said it without cruelty, without raised volume, the way a man states a fact about the weather, and that steadiness was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Priya's face cycled through several emotions in the span of a few seconds. Disbelief, humiliation, something that might have been the beginning of anger, before she gathered whatever dignity she had left and walked toward the back office without another word. Mara stood at the desk with her hands pressed flat against the counter, the same posture she had held days ago while Priya scolded her, except now the man on the other side of that counter had just dismantled the hierarchy that scolding had come from. You didn't have to do that, Mara said quietly, once Priya had disappeared behind the door. I did, Salvatore said. I have very little patience for people who mistake power for permission to be small toward others. She had both. She chose smallness. That still doesn't mean I wanted her fired because of me. It wasn't because of you. His eyes held hers, steady, unblinking. It was because of who she is when she thinks no one important is watching. You were simply the reason I found out. There was something in the way he said it, some acknowledgement underneath the words that this had never really been about testing his staff in general, that she had become, somewhere in the last 3 days, a specific thing he was paying attention to. Mara felt the weight of that attention settle over her like heat, and she did not know whether to be flattered or afraid. Maybe both. She was beginning to suspect that with a man like Salvatore Conti, both would always be true at once. I have a meeting, he said, straightening, the moment closing as abruptly as it had opened. But I'll be back. I'd like to speak with you properly, not as an owner inspecting his staff, as myself. He left before she could answer, and the black car pulled away from the curb, and Mara stood at the desk for a long moment, feeling like the floor of her ordinary life had shifted slightly beneath her, tilted toward something she had no name for yet. That was when she made the mistake of looking up his name once the clinic had gone quiet for lunch. She should have known better. Curiosity, in this case, was not a harmless thing. What the search results told her was not a business profile. It was a tangle of old news articles, half of them behind paywalls, references to federal investigations that had gone nowhere. A name, Conti, that appeared again and again alongside words like organized and alleged and family. The kind of word choices journalists used when they knew something they could not prove. There were photographs of him at a distance, exiting courthouses, standing at the edge of gatherings where every other man in frame wore the same watchful stillness he did. She read for 20 minutes with her lunch going cold beside her, and by the end of it, her hands were not quite steady. She understood, with the particular clarity of a person confirming a suspicion they had already half formed, that Salvatore Conti was not simply a wealthy man who owned clinics as a philanthropic gesture. He was something else entirely, something with a different set of rules, a different cost of proximity. She should have been afraid enough to keep her distance. Instead, what she felt, sitting alone in the break room with cold coffee and a phone full of half-proven allegations, was something closer to recognition. The eyes that had watched her pour a stranger a cup of coffee had not been the eyes of a monster. She did not know, yet, whether that meant anything. He came back 4 days later, not in disguise, not announced, simply appearing at the end of her shift as she was pulling her coat on in the small staff room. He stood in the doorway the way he had stood in the clinic entrance that first rainy morning, waiting to be let in rather than assuming entry. "I looked you up," Mara said, before he could speak. She thought it was better to say it plainly than let it sit unspoken between them. "I assumed you would." He did not look surprised or defensive. "What did you find?" "Enough to know I probably shouldn't be standing here talking to you." "Probably not," he agreed. "You're welcome to walk past me and go home. I won't stop you." She did not move. That, more than anything, told her something about herself she was not entirely comfortable knowing yet. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked instead. "You fired the person who was cruel to me. You could have stopped there." "I could have," he said. "I didn't want to." The honesty of it disarmed her more than any practiced charm would have. He was not performing warmth. He was simply stating a fact, the same way he had stated the fact of Priya's dismissal, the same flat certainty. "I run a business that deals in things I'm not proud of," he continued, when she did not respond right away. "I won't lie to you about that, because I think you'd find out eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me. But the clinics are mine in a different way. They're the one part of what I've built that I keep clean, deliberately, because of something that happened to someone I loved a long time ago. Watching you treat a stranger with kindness when you had nothing to gain from it and something small to lose, that meant something to me. I don't often see that, not in the world I move through." "I don't know what you want from me," Mara said. "Neither do I, entirely," Salvatore admitted, and something about the admission, the rare vulnerability of a powerful man confessing uncertainty, made her chest tighten in a way she did not have a name for. "I know I'd like to see you again, somewhere that isn't a waiting room." She should have said no. She would think about that later, the exact moment she chose not to say no, replaying it in her mind the way people replay the instant before an accident, trying to locate the fork where a different choice might have been made. Instead, what she said was, "Just coffee, since apparently I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I'll take the coffee." That was the beginning, and neither of them called it anything more than that for a long while, though both of them understood, somewhere beneath the careful language they used with each other, that something had already been set into motion the moment she had poured a stranger a cup of black coffee against explicit orders not to. Their coffee became a weekly thing, unhurried, held in a small shop 3 blocks from the clinic that no one from Whitmore ever seemed to frequent. Salvatore did not bring bodyguards to these meetings, or, if he did, Mara never saw them, and she came to understand later that this was itself a kind of statement, a deliberate choice to be unguarded with her in a life that otherwise afforded him no such luxury. He asked about her family in Ohio, about the nursing degree she was still paying off, about the particular reasons she had chosen reception work at a clinic instead of something that paid better and demanded less patience. She learned, in turn, about the brother he had lost 12 years ago, an older brother named Antonio, who had vouched for a man that later turned out to be an informant, a mistake that had cost Antonio his life and left Salvatore carrying a guilt he described only once, briefly, his jaw tight the entire time, before changing the subject. He said her name differently than anyone else did. She noticed it the 3rd week, the way he said Mara like it carried weight, like it was a word he was handling carefully. No one else said her name that way. Her own mother did not say her name that way. The danger arrived without warning, the way it always did in his world, On an evening in early autumn, when Mara left the coffee shop and found a man waiting near her car who was not smiling the way strangers usually smiled when they wanted directions. He was broad, dressed in a leather jacket too heavy for the weather, and when he said her name, it came out wrong, a name he had learned recently and for a purpose she did not like. "Tell Conti his clinics aren't as protected as he thinks," the man said. "Tell him the Bartolini family remembers what he took from them." Mara's pulse spiked, but her mind, trained by months of handling frightened patients and worse, frightened families, did the thing it had been trained to do. It went cold and quick instead of panicked. She did not scream. She did not run blindly. She stepped sideways toward the well-lit entrance of the pharmacy on the corner, keeping her body angled so the man would have to follow into visibility if he wanted to continue, and she pulled her phone from her pocket and pressed the emergency contact she had saved under Salvatore's name only 2 weeks earlier, letting it dial while she kept talking, kept the man's attention on her voice instead of her hands. "I don't know anything about the Bartolini family," she said, keeping her voice even despite the way her heart hammered. "I work at a clinic. I answer phones." "You're the one he's soft for," the man said, stepping closer despite her positioning. "That makes you useful." It was the phone, ringing through in her pocket, connecting to a call she had not been able to fully complete, that saved her. The automated voicemail message loud enough in the quiet street that the man, startled at the sound, glanced around for cameras or witnesses, and in that half-second of distraction, Mara moved. She was not fast in the way action stories describe fast. She was decisive, which mattered more. She shoved through the pharmacy door, triggering the bell above it, calling out for help in a voice pitched to Carrie, and by the time the man decided the risk of following her inside outweighed whatever message he had been sent to deliver, she was already behind the counter with the pharmacist and 2 customers between them, her phone finally connecting the call. Salvatore's voice sharp and immediate on the other end, asking what was wrong before she had said a single word. He arrived within 11 minutes, and the calm she had maintained through the entire encounter finally cracked the moment she saw him walk through the pharmacy door, his face carrying an expression she had never seen on him before, something closer to fear than she thought a man like him was capable of showing. "Are you hurt?" he said. Not a question so much as a demand for information, his hands finding her shoulders, her face, checking for injury with a thoroughness that told her exactly how much this had cost him internally. "I'm fine," she said. "I handled it." "You shouldn't have had to," he said, and there was something underneath the words, a fury directed entirely at himself. "This is exactly what I didn't want. This is why I kept my world away from yours." "But you didn't," Mara said. "Not really. You've been in my world since the day you walked in wearing a torn shirt and let me pour you a coffee." She held his gaze, steady despite the adrenaline still working through her system. "I'm not asking you to protect me from consequences I chose to walk into with open eyes. I looked you up. I knew what I was doing when I kept having coffee with you." Something in his face shifted, the fear giving way to something quieter, more dangerous in its own way. "The Bartolinis have wanted territory I took from them for years," he said. "They must have been watching me long enough to know you matter. That makes you a target now, whether either of us wanted that or not." "Then we deal with it," Mara said. "Together. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand what that means." He studied her for a long moment, the way he had studied the waiting room months ago, cataloging something, deciding something. "You understand what staying means," he said. "This isn't a life that offers exits once you're truly in it." "I know," Mara said. "I'm staying anyway." The confession, when it finally came, was not delivered with poetry. It came 3 nights later, in the quiet of his study, both of them still tense from the security measures that had been put in place around the clinic. Extra men at the entrances, cameras rerouted, a level of visible protection that made even Ruth Elmswood move with unusual caution through her own hallways. Salvatore stood at the window with his back to her, and when he spoke, his voice was rough in a way she had not heard before. "I told you to go home the night that man approached you," he said. "After. I told the driver to take you home, and I meant to stay away from you until this settled. I could not do it. I sat in this room for 2 hours trying to convince myself it was the responsible thing, and I could not make myself pick up the phone and end it." "You didn't call," Mara said quietly. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." He turned to face her then, and there was nothing guarded left in his expression, nothing calculated. "That's the truth of what I am when it comes to you. I know what it costs to keep you close. I decided to keep you close anyway. That's not something I say lightly, Mara. In my life, decisions like that get people killed." She crossed the room and did not stop until there was no distance left between them, and he did not step back, did not perform the caution either of them might have claimed to want. "Then we're both making a reckless decision," she said. "I'd rather make it with my eyes open than pretend I don't know what I'm choosing." He kissed her then, finally, after months of careful distance, and it was not gentle in the way first kisses in stories were supposed to be gentle. It was certain, the way everything about him was certain, his hand finding the back of her neck like he had been waiting to do exactly that for longer than either of them had admitted aloud. When it ended, neither of them apologized for it, and neither of them pretended it had not changed the shape of everything between them. The cost came 2 weeks later, when the Bartolini family made their real move, not against Mara directly this time, but against the clinic itself, an attempted arson at the Staten Island location that Ruth Elmswood's night staff caught and extinguished before real damage was done. But the message was unmistakable. Salvatore's face, when he told her about it, had gone to a stillness that frightened her more than any anger would have. "This ends now," he said. "I'm calling a sit-down. I'm ending this the way it should have ended years ago." "Then I'm coming with you," Mara said. "Absolutely not." His refusal was immediate, sharp. "This is not a negotiation you attend, Mara. This is the part of my world I have kept away from you for a reason." "You didn't keep it away from me," she said. "It came to my car door and used my name. I'm already in it. I'd rather be in the room where the decision gets made than sitting somewhere waiting to hear whether you're alive." The argument lasted the better part of an hour, and in the end it was not persuasion that won her a place at that meeting, but the simple fact that Salvatore could not, in his own heart, argue against the logic of a woman who had already proven she did not fold under pressure. She had done more than survive an encounter with the Bartolini family's messenger. She had outthought him. The sit-down took place in a private room at a restaurant in the Bronx that had hosted meetings like this for 3 decades, the kind of place where the owner personally locked the front door and turned away regular customers for the evening without explanation. Mara sat beside Salvatore, dressed carefully, composed despite the hammering of her own pulse, watching the head of the Bartolini family, a heavy-set man named Dominic Bartolini with cold, patient eyes, take his seat across the table with 2 of his own men flanking him. The conversation that followed was conducted in the careful, coded language of men who had spent their lives avoiding saying anything that could be used against them later. Territory discussed as though it were simply a matter of business, debts referenced obliquely, the word respect deployed as both a threat and a demand. Mara said nothing for the first 20 minutes, watching, reading the room the way she had learned to read waiting rooms full of frightened patients, understanding tension and its sources before words ever confirmed it. It was Dominic Bartolini who finally addressed her directly, his eyes moving over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "This is the girl," he said to Salvatore, not to her. The receptionist. My man tells me she's clever. Clever enough to run into a pharmacy instead of screaming in the street like a fool. She's not a subject for this conversation, Salvatore said, his voice carrying a warning that made the room's temperature drop several degrees. She's sitting at my table, Dominic said. That makes her a subject. Mara felt Salvatore's hand tighten almost imperceptibly against the arm of his chair, felt the danger of the moment sharpen. And she made a decision then that she would think about for the rest of her life, as the moment she truly understood what it meant to stand beside a man like Salvatore Conti, instead of simply beside him. I work the front desk at his clinic, Mara said, meeting Dominic Bartolini's eyes directly, refusing to look away first. I check people in. I pour coffee for strangers when they look like they need it. I don't know the first thing about territory or tribute or whatever business the two of you have unfinished between your families. But I do know that sending a man to threaten a woman in a parking lot because you couldn't get to Mr. Conti directly tells me everything I need to know about which one of you actually has the upper hand here. She let the silence stretch a beat before continuing. You sent someone after someone who works a front desk. That's not power. That's desperation wearing a nice suit. The room went utterly still. One of Dominic's men shifted in his seat, a hand moving fractionally toward his jacket before a look from Salvatore stopped it cold. Dominic himself stared at Mara for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Before, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound that seemed to diffuse some of the tension in the room, even as it raised new questions about what came next. She's got nerve, Dominic said to Salvatore. More than half the men who sit at my table. She's not for sale, and she's not a bargaining chip, Salvatore said, his voice flat and final. Whatever this is between the Bartolinis and the Contis, it ends tonight, one way or another. I have no interest in continuing a war neither of us can afford. But I will not accept another approach toward anyone under my protection. That's not a threat. It's the only offer you're getting. The negotiation that followed took another hour, careful and precise. Territory redrawn. An old debt from Salvatore's father's era finally settled in a way that satisfied enough of Dominic's pride to end the matter without further bloodshed. It was not the kind of resolution that came from violence, though the threat of it had hung over every word exchanged. It came from two men who had both grown tired of a fight that had already cost both families more than either wanted to admit, and from a woman who had refused to let fear dictate the terms of the conversation. When they finally left the restaurant, the autumn air cold and sharp after the tension of the room, Salvatore turned to her before they reached the car, his expression somewhere between disbelief and something that looked, unmistakably, like awe. You could have gotten yourself killed in there, he said. I didn't, Mara said. I got us a deal instead. You are not what I expected when I walked into that clinic in a torn shirt, he said, shaking his head slowly. I thought I was testing my staff. I did not expect to find the one person who would end up standing beside me at a table like that and not flinch. You didn't rescue me tonight, Mara said, holding his gaze. I'm not interested in being someone you rescue. I'd rather be someone who stands next to you when it counts. You already are, he said, and this time when he said her name, quiet, almost reverent, she understood, finally and completely, what that particular tone had always meant. From the very first afternoon in the waiting room, it had never been assessment. It had been recognition, from the beginning, of something he had not expected to find and had not known, until now, how badly he needed. 3 months later, Mara still worked the front desk at Whitmore Family Clinic, though she had been promoted to office manager, a position she had earned rather than been given. And though the staff now understood, without anyone needing to say it aloud, that kindness toward patients was not a liability to be managed, but the entire point of the place. She still poured coffee for strangers who looked like they needed it, though now there was always, without fail, an extra cup waiting on the days Salvatore came by unannounced, dressed as himself, no longer needing a disguise to walk through doors that were already, in every way that mattered, his and hers together. She thought sometimes about the version of herself who had poured a cup of coffee for a stranger in a torn white shirt, not knowing what that single small act of decency would eventually cost her, or give her. She did not regret it. Standing at the front desk on a quiet Tuesday morning, watching a black car pull up to the curb and a man in a perfectly tailored suit step out into the light without hesitation, without disguise, without anything left to hide from her, Mara understood that some choices, made freely and with open eyes, were worth every danger that followed. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more dark romance narrations, and drop a comment letting me know which part of this story stayed with you the longest. New stories drop every week, so don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss the next one.